At City Hall. Now, rap is a kind of music that combines the power of poetry with a very distinctive beat. And in Canadian cities, teenagers are using that power to put across their messages.
That CBC News clip I just played for you is from all the way back in 1990. Although hip-hop was already a fast-growing cultural force in the US as the 80s wore on, it took a while for Canada to embrace rap music, to put it lightly. Where rap was beginning to thrive south of the border, the idea of a Canadian rapper in that space probably seemed completely far-fetched to most American rap fans during those earlier years. Even now, many people tend to think of one man when they think of Canadian hip-hop: Drake. And for good reason. The artist-born Aubrey Drake Graham has ruled pop, rap, and R&B music with an iron fist for nearly a decade and a half now. But the history of Canadian rap music doesn't start and end with Wheelchair Jimmy. Not even close. Hip-hop in Canada has had quite the slow-burning journey to get to where it is now, and as the world has spent 2023 celebrating 50 years of hip-hop, it's worth taking this opportunity to deep dive on a musical movement that has seen more bumps on the road toward Canadian commercial prominence than you'll find on the Trans-Canada Highway. So with that, here's a history lesson on how rap music evolved in Canada before Drake showed up.
This is a throwdown, a showdown. Hell no, I can't slow down. It's gonna go.
Canada's rap music legacy began in earnest during the 1980s, but the first Canadian rap song came out right beforehand in 1979, the same year the Sugar Hill Gang dropped Rapper's Delight. That first north-of-the-border hip-hop track was released right after Rapper's Delight and was basically an answer song to that track, Ladies Delight by Mr. Q, recorded in a basement studio below a cosmetics store in Toronto's Eglinton West neighborhood, aka Little Jamaica.
Well, I am the man you're about to put it in the hearts of young ladies.
This distinction has, however, been mistakenly attributed to the bum rap by Ottawa's Singing Fools. Released 3 years after Ladies Delight, the bum rap was essentially a protest song against the Canadian government's handling of wage control at the time, complete with a famous sample of then Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
At any cost? How far would you go with that? How far would you extend that?
Well, just watch me.
How far would you extend that?
Just watch me.
Ladies Delight, meanwhile, wouldn't be recognized as the first Canadian rap track until 2021. Says Canadian industry mogul Dave Click Cox, quote, "The reason it never really came to be known as a Canadian record is because they just took the records and drove to Buffalo and sold them into the American market." Canada's first ever rap album is credited to Rap the Night Away by Bobby Boye and Demo Cates, aka Bobby Demo or the Bobby Demo Band, released in 1981 with features from Mr. Q.
Please wear clothes suitable for grieving.
The funny thing is, Mr. Q, who died from COVID age 70 in 2021, wasn't originally Canadian, and neither were Boye or Cates. Born J.W. McGee, Mr. Q grew up in North Carolina and Michigan before moving to Toronto in the mid-70s, while Cates and Boye both moved there from Detroit. A pivotal venue for the development of Canadian rap music was the Concert Hall in Toronto, where local MCs would battle rap against American ones, an event held by local DJ and influential promoter Ron Nelson, who helped book shows in Canada for acts like Run DMC and Public Enemy. Thanks to Nelson, those two acts performed at Canada's first big rap concert in 1987 at Toronto's Varsity Stadium. Nelson also helped give Canadian rap artists a new avenue for exposure by hosting the country's first ever hip-hop radio show, The Fantastic Voyage, on Toronto's now defunct CKLN-FM, aired on Saturday afternoons from 1983 to 1991. Another factor in helping sow the seeds of rap music in Canada was the uptick in Caribbean immigration during the 60s and 70s, thanks in no small part to changes made to the Canadian Immigration Act in 1962, where racial discrimination was no longer grounds for not accepting new immigrants into Canada. Many of Canada's biggest rap talents would come from West Indian communities, both in the earlier days and in the years to come. Crucially, Much Music would launch its own hip-hop dedicated TV show, Rap City, in 1988. This became an important resource for Canuck rap talent, giving artists a chance to be heard by hip-hop fans from coast to coast when mainstream radio wouldn't bite. Despite all of this, major Canadian labels didn't have much faith or interest in genres like hip-hop on a commercial level, so rap artists in Canada had to be developed independently. Hip-hop during this time could often feel like an inherently underground labor of love, standing in stark contrast to Canadian pop music trends of that era. Meanwhile, south of the border, the genre spent the 80s and early 90s firmly establishing itself as an undeniable pop culture movement. As far as commercial success for Canadian rappers goes, Maestro Fresh Wes, born Wesley Williams and known as the godfather of Canadian hip-hop, and the Dream Warriors were two of the earliest success stories. Maestro's boisterous, sample-heavy 1989 track, Let Your Backbone Slide, remains one of Canada's seminal rap singles, becoming a top 10 song at home and also charting at number 14 on the US Billboard Hot Rap Singles chart. Let Your Backbone Slide would become Canada's biggest pre-Drake rap single until Kardinal Offishall's Dangerous eclipsed it in 2008. Maestro would also take home the first ever Juno Award, Canada's Grammy equivalent, for Best Rap Recording. More on that award's history later. His debut album, Symphony in Effect, would also go platinum in Canada, and Let Your Backbone Slide is the first rap song to be inducted into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame. Says his sister and veteran Canadian radio personality DJ Mel Boogie, quote, "Wes is my older brother, so I had a front seat to the whole making of what he did. My kids don't believe it, but there was a time when Maestro went to sign autographs at HMV and they had to shut down the mall because there were that many people there. This was the first rap song many people heard on mainstream Canadian radio." For Wes to have the success he did at that time astounds me because he had nothing. College radio was the only support. He actually had to go to clubs and physically give out a record to the DJ to play. Stuff that we kinda take for granted nowadays. Dream Warriors, meanwhile, gave the world their definition of a boombastic jazz style in 1990 with My Definition of a Boombastic Jazz Style. The song samples the famous Quincy Jones tune Soul Bossa Nova that most people recognize nowadays from Austin Powers, but was known in Canada at the time as the theme song to a Canadian game show, Definition. Though it failed to crack the US pop charts, My Definition of a Boombastic Jazz Style hit the top 20 in the UK, Sweden, and Switzerland, while also charting in Australia, Germany, and the Netherlands. Despite their success overseas, getting airplay and recognition in their homeland still proved to be a challenge for the Warriors. Canadian rap artists finding success proved to be elusive in general, and more challenges and obstacles were still to come. Take this quote from longtime promoter, producer, and manager, Soul Guy. Quote, "After My Definition, nothing happened for 2 years. No labels were signing or trying to sign anything. Nobody was getting a shot. Radio disappeared with Wes and the Dream Warriors, and it still hasn't come back." From a purely commercial standpoint, hip-hop in the 90s completely and utterly belonged to the United States. Virtually every major rap artist we think of from that decade is American, whether from the East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, or the South. A relative lack of resources and vessels for promotion, not to mention a healthy dose of systemic racism, were arguably big reasons why Canadian rap music couldn't reach its full potential domestically. Even some Canadian MCs, like Maestro Fresh Wes, had moved stateside, with Maestro even releasing an album titled Nah, This Kid Can't Be From Canada in 1994, after moving to New York. Despite that hilariously self-aware title, he'd never ultimately break through south of the border. There's also Devin, an English-born Toronto-based rapper whose 1990 single Mr. Metro caused a stir since the title references Toronto police officers, even though he claims the song was about racial biases from law enforcement across North America. The song's video even had to blur out explicit references to Toronto cops, as he'd received threats from the Toronto Police Service to arrest him over the song, citing defamation. 1990 was also the year where an all-star team of Canadian rap artists banded together as the supergroup Dance Appeal on the track Can't Repress the Cause, which advocated for greater exposure and inclusion for the genre within Canada. Still, rap's presence in the country was becoming steadily harder to ignore. Even Celine Dion included a rap break in her song Unison.
Together, or even apart, I feel unison inside my heart, not with
Russian their song Roll the Bones.
Relax, get busy with the facts.
And years later, we'd see the Bare Naked Ladies goofily interpolate Busta Rhymes' verse in a Tribe Called Quest scenario on their hit song, 1 Week.
Chuckity Choco, the chocolate chicken, the rear cock diesel, but chicks they were kicking.
Chickadee China, the Chinese chicken. You have a drumstick and your brain stops sticking.
Another key figure in early Canadian hip-hop was Michie Mee. Not only was she Canada's first prominent female rapper, she'd also be the first Canadian rapper full stop to be signed by an American label, inking a deal with First Priority and Atlantic Records. That said, label heads and radio stations reportedly didn't love the more reggae-heavy part of her sound. Guys, her album is literally called Jamaican Funk Canadian Style. You knew what you were getting yourselves into. Though Michie Mee managed to become the only homegrown rapper to make the pop charts in Canada between 1992 and 1998, she did so by featuring on a reggae/rap metal band song. Canada's contributions to American hip-hop during the 90s weren't negligible, though. In 1992, Main Source, comprised of two Toronto DJs, Sir Scratch and K-Cut, released Live at the Barbecue, which opens with a verse from a young and not yet famous Nas, who hits listeners with one particularly jaw-dropping line.
Verbal assassin, my architect pleases. When I was 12, I went to hell for snuffing Jesus.
That same year, the closest thing Canada had to an international rap hit, the dancehall adjacent Informer by Snow, topped the Billboard Hot 100 and in many other countries around the world. It doesn't really count, but take victories wherever you can, I guess. And hey, we got a hilarious parody of it from fellow Canadian Jim Carrey on In Living Color.
Imposter, I'm just a middle-class worker from Toronto. In spite of how I sound, single one platinum bigger than Marley and Jimmy and Yellowman, but I'm not even mulatto. My reggae's watered down.
The development of homegrown rap talent in Canada during the 90s could feel like getting over the commercial hump was so close, yet so far. In Toronto, there were attempts as early as 1990 to get a hip-hop radio station on the airwaves. But instead of making national music history and catering to a whole new niche of listeners across Canada's largest and most diverse city, the CRTC chose another country radio station despite one already existing in Toronto. 7 years later, another application was snubbed in favor of moving CBC Radio 1 from AM to FM radio. This made genres like hip-hop and R&B difficult for Canadian listeners to discover, especially if they lived outside southern Ontario, where fans at least had the luxury of tuning into stations in neighboring Buffalo or Detroit. Despite some Toronto stations starting to play more rap music, Canadian commercial radio as a whole wasn't swayed. And the best way for rappers in Canada to get noticed beyond their regional bubbles was being played on Rap City or on university radio. Toronto wasn't the only city in Ontario where hip-hop was making waves, mind you. In 1992, Ottawa's Organized Rhyme released Check the OR.
Check the OR, you like it so far. Check the OR, you like it so far.
With its second verse being from MC Bones, aka a young Tom Green. Yes, that Tom Green. While it failed to crack the pop charts, Check the OR received extensive airplay on Much Music. During this time, you had a better chance of getting airplay on Much than you did on the radio, even with the support of a label. But by 1999, the floodgates finally opened for a rap radio station to hit the airwaves in Canada. The CBC realized they could give up 2 frequencies to be claimed by new applicants for radio stations, breeding a renewed sense of hope for a hip-hop/R&B station to be approved. The federal government also gave the CRTC an order in council to prioritize stations catering to racially diverse populations in Toronto. The following year, Milestone Radio, the group lobbying to secure a hip-hop radio station in Canada, would finally get their license. Flow 93.5, aka CFXJ, would be launched in Toronto in 2001, with other Canadian cities later following suit. Another turning point for Canadian hip-hop was a compilation album, Rap Essentials Volume 1, by the now defunct Beat Factory Records. Released in 1996, it helped bring exposure to artists like Kardinal Offishall, Choclair,
21 years of pure bullshit. It makes me wanna bang my heads off the walls and do some like orchestra.
and the Rascals.
But of course,
Each of whom appear on another song I'll soon be discussing a lot in this video. Maestro Fresh Wes, known back then as simply Maestro, also scored a hit domestically in 1998 with Stick to Your Vision. featuring a distinctly Canadian sample from the Guess Who.
These eyes cry. Seen a lot of shame in the game. Seen a lot of pain with the fame.
On that same album, Built to Last, Maestro also gave us an unmistakably Toronto-themed banger, 416905 TO Party Anthem, named after the two area codes of Toronto proper and the Greater Toronto Area. 5 or 6 hours down the 401, in Montreal, Quebec, a French-language rap movement also started bubbling during the 80s before really taking flight in the 90s. The first Canadian rap song in French, though not technically from the rap genre, is credited as being Le Rapabilly by Lucien Francoeur. The end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s also saw acts like Le Boyfriend and Mouvement Rap Francophone, aka MRF, emerge. While Anglophone acts like MCJ and Cool G, both of whom moved to Montreal separately from Halifax, had already made waves around 1990 with the success of tracks like So Listen, groups like Dubmatic and Muzion would significantly raise French-Canadian rap's profile during the 90s and early 2000s. While the delivery of groups like Dubmatic in particular sounded more indebted to rap from France than to the local accents and joual of everyday Quebecers, Dubmatic made Quebec rap history by topping Canada's francophone pop charts, and their debut LP, La Force de Comprendre, went platinum. Muzion, meanwhile, would go on to work with Wyclef Jean and the group's brother-sister duo Stanley and Jenny Salgado, aka Impasse and J-Kill respectively, would enjoy successful solo careers. The evolution of French-Canadian hip-hop would see more distinctly Quebecois takes on rap music, as well as rap from other French-speaking parts of Canada, start to flourish with each passing decade. But frankly, this whole chapter of Canada's rap music history deserves a deep dive video all its own, and I'd like to do the voiceover for that one in French. A rap scene within Indigenous communities also started popping off during the mid-90s and 2000s, including acts from all corners of the nation such as True Res Crew, Team Res Official, War Party, Equal, and the Scalpa Squad. Better yet, that scene is continuing to grow today. But I also think the history of Indigenous hip-hop would merit its own video though, and I'd want to interview people more directly in tune with that scene to give it the best possible context for viewers who want to get into it but don't know where to start. But perhaps the biggest turning point for Canadian rap's exposure across the country came courtesy of Vancouver's Rascals. First, there was Northern Touch.
We notorious, huh? Ain't nobody can bang with us. Rascals checkmate.
A Canadian posse cut for the ages, Northern Touch saw the Rascals bring along fellow Vancouverite Checkmate to join forces with Toronto's Kardinal Offishall, Choclair, and Thrust over a BT Express sample many rap heads also recognized from DMX's Get At Me Dog, released that same year, while flipping it into something uniquely and unapologetically Canadian.
All the way from T-Dot to the Van City All-Star. Rude boys freak you like a fantasy.
Throughout, this group of Canuck MCs waste no time making it abundantly clear that Canadian rap had arrived and was here to stay. Choclair would score a hit of his own not long after Northern Touch with Let's Ride, produced by Kardinal, and which hit the top 40 of Canada's singles chart. In other words, Northern Touch was a watershed moment in Canadian rap history, and Seth Rogen wasn't really wrong when he said this to Nardwuar.
Well, there was that song, Northern Touch, which, you know, if you're a Canadian rap fan, is like the be-all. It's like, it's our stairway to heaven, basically.
Although Northern Touch didn't quite crack the Canadian top 40, its peak of number 41 on the Canadian singles chart was higher than other homegrown rap songs were able to reach domestically during that era. Its video also blew up on Much Music and stayed in heavy rotation on the channel. Even some American programmers took notice, as the video would also get airplay on BET. The Rascals were also pivotal in pushing Canadian rap forward on a systemic level. When their 1997 album Cash Crop, which Northern Touch wasn't initially on but was later added to, won the 1998 Juno for Best Rap Recording, the group comprised of Red One, Misfit, and DJ Chemo refused the award, all while the ceremony was held that year in their native Vancouver. The award had previously gone to Maestro Fresh Wes, the Dream Warriors, Devin, TBTBT aka Too Bad to Be True, Ghetto Concept, and Choclair. But for 8 years after being introduced, that category was not shown during the Juno's main televised ceremony, and this was no exception. The Rascals even showed up late to the non-televised gala and only found out they won upon their arrival. The group immediately cited racism as a factor behind the category not being shown during the main ceremony, and the Best Rap Recording category would be televised the following year, won by, you guessed it, Northern Touch. At the time of their refusal, though, the Rascals' manager, Soul Guy, who I quoted earlier in this video, had this to say, quote, "In view of the lack of real inclusion of black music in this ceremony, this feels like a token gesture towards honoring the real impact of urban music in Canada. Urban music, reggae, R&B, and rap, that's all black music, and it's not represented at the Junos. We decided that until it is, we were going to take a stance." In many ways, this was Canada's answer to a similar protest almost a decade earlier at the 1989 Grammys, where artists like Will Smith, aka The Fresh Prince, and DJ Jazzy Jeff, as well as fellow nominees Salt and Peppa and LL Cool J, boycotted the ceremony due to the first ever Best Rap Performance Award not being televised. Jazzy Jeff and The Fresh Prince would go on to win that award for Parents Just Don't Understand, but refused to accept it or attend the awards show. Based on this, Canada still seemed to be at least 9 years behind their southern neighbors with hip-hop. Entering the 2000s, though, the genre's influence on Canadian pop culture could no longer be denied. Though Canadian rap music's growth had been staggered at best, the turn of the millennium is arguably the starting point where things truly began trending for the better. Toronto remained the biggest producer of rap talent domestically, with artists like Chaos and Kanon in particular becoming bona fide Canadian rap success stories during this decade. Vancouver's Swollen members also became a platinum-selling group in Canada thanks to hits like Lady Venom, Bring It Home, and Fuel Injected, with MCs Prevail and Madchild occasionally being perfectly complemented by singer-slash-rapper Mocha Only. Prior to Drake, Swollen members were the Juno's most decorated rap act, taking home a total of 6 awards. Talented artists from smaller Canadian cities would also come along in the 2000s, like Halifax's Buck 65 and Classified, London, Ontario's Shad, and Edmonton's Cadence Weapon, who eventually served as his hometown's poet laureate from 2009 to 2011. Classified, who first stepped onto the scene in 1995, eventually became one of Canada's more famous rappers domestically, even making a song based around a sample of the national anthem, right as the country was months away from hosting the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver. Kardinal Offishall would become one of Canada's first true rap stars during the aughts too. His 2000 single, Bacardi Slang, introduced many listeners not only to him, if they didn't know him through Northern Touch, but also to the lingo frequently used by West Indian communities in Toronto. That same year, Cardi was also featured on Baby Blue Soundcrew's single, Money Jane, teaming up not only with Canadian R&B star Julie Black, some may remember her from her awesome lyric change while singing O Canada at the 2023 NBA All-Star Game, but also with soon-to-be Jamaican dancehall sensation, Sean Paul.
Dark brown frame.
Although Kardinal was already an established Canadian rap heavyweight by the time he released his 2001 sophomore album Quest for Fire, Firestarter Volume 1, it would take him 7 years after that to break through internationally, which he pulled off with his Akon-assisted 2008 hit, Dangerous. Despite all these steps forward, Canadian rap still didn't necessarily have all the best tools for artists to succeed. CBC Radio 3 and Radio-Canada's Band à Part, both key vessels for Top 40 radio, was the best way for rap to be heard in Canada at that time, and even then you needed some degree of crossover appeal. Even Cardi's Dangerous likely wouldn't have reached its commercial heights without its hook coming from Akon, a global star at the time. Between this and a litany of other examples, true American success continued to elude our biggest rap stars. And then, this guy.
I'm from the city where people be getting threatened for showing they facing precincts. Ladies leasing, arranging, and renting basements and regions. Some people making that change and spent in places that's decent. It costs from summers before they replace them with something recent.
Any discussion about Canadian hip-hop arguably has to be split between two eras, pre-Drake and post-Drake. If people want a full post-Drake era video, I'd be happy to make that one too, but for the purpose of this video, I'll just start with this. Aubrey Drake Graham redefined what it meant to be successful as a Canadian rapper, and after dropping his first mixtape in 2006, that started in earnest 3 years later when he signed to Young Money after Lil Wayne took notice of him and flew him out to Houston to meet him. Drake would then release his debut EP, So Far Gone, on the label. Its lead single, Best I Ever Had, soared all the way to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, unprecedented in Canadian hip-hop history at that time, and kicked off his still monstrously successful solo career. That song signified the beginning of a Toronto kid previously known for playing a high schooler in a wheelchair on Degrassi: The Next Generation's ascent to global, record-breaking superstardom. Nowadays, love him or hate him, it's hard to overstate Drake's influence on Canada's hip-hop landscape, or separate him from it. He's also a huge reason why Canadian R&B has grown so much in recent years, thanks to his early support of eventual pop superstar The Weeknd, as well as signing acts like Party Next Door, Majid Jordan, Division, and Roy Woods to his OVO sound imprint. On the rap side, artists like Jazz Cartier, Havaya Mighty, Nav, Trey Mission, Toby, and Tory Lanez have come out of Toronto, or should I say the Six, in its post-Drake rap climate. Many of the hottest rap producers in recent years have also come from either Toronto or somewhere in southern Ontario, such as Boy Wonder, Murda Beats, 1985, Wonder Girl, and Drake's right-hand man, Noah 40 Shabib, whom cinephiles may recognize from his role in The Virgin Suicides as a child actor. Other Canadian cities have produced hard-hitting rap acts in recent years too, like Ottawa's Belly, who first gained mainstream attention in Canada in the late aughts and is known nowadays partly for frequently collaborating with The Weeknd. There's also Edmonton's Mist Milano, Vancouver's Tommy Genesis, and Calgary's Cartel Madras, the latter of whom are signed to Sub Pop. One does have to wonder why no true blue Canadian rapper has come close to emulating Drake's success since he first arrived, but that's a topic for a whole other video. Since the Rascals' refusal in 1998 and win for Northern Touch the following year, the Juno for Rap Recording of the Year has gone the most times to Drake and Swollen members, who both won that award on 4 occasions. All still isn't perfect, however, as when Drake hosted the Junos in 2011, the first rapper and black host in the show's history, he was nominated 6 times but got completely shut out. He hasn't returned to the Junos since, and the Rap Recording of the Year category still isn't always shown during the main broadcast. In recent years, Drake hasn't even submitted his music for Juno consideration. In spite of his remarkable worldwide success, Drake hasn't forgotten about Canada's original hip-hop pillars. He'd even stage a concert in Toronto in 2022 featuring performances by Kardinal Offishall, Maestro Fresh Wes, Choclair, Rascals, Socrates, and Chaos, among other Canadian hip-hop and R&B stars of yesteryear. Indigenous rap has also continued to flourish since the 2000s, thanks to acts like Team Res Official, Dreezus, and Joey Styles, and more recently, Dakota Bear and Snotty Nose Res Kids, as well as the Hallucination, formerly a Tribe Called Red, who sometimes fuse their pummeling, bass-heavy beats with features from rap artists like Yassine Bey, formerly Mos Def. There's a thriving rap scene in Quebec too, specifically in Montreal, on both sides of the linguistic divide. Again, I'd expand on both scenes' more recent developments in separate videos if people want them. As much as Canadian hip-hop has grown by leaps and bounds, too many people think of one guy as being its core centerpiece. Like with anything in life, it takes a village to raise a child. And in this case, that village spent years building upon a cultural movement that began in 1973 at a house party somewhere in the Bronx, and giving it that northern touch. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. This is my first ever video for this channel, so this is all kinda new to me, but I have a lot more content planned for it in the future, so let me know what kind of music you'd want to see me cover in my future uploads. In the meantime, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. If I forgot to mention any Canadian rap artists or important moments in Canadian hip-hop history, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll also make a playlist of all the songs I referenced in this video if people want one. And yeah, this has been Sound and Vision, and I will see you next time.